So anyway, first of all, I'm not sure how many of you were on last night. What I would like to do is maybe try some of the tricky things you can do with this program. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says Participants. And if you click on that and open it up, on the far right, there are three little dots to the right of Mute Me. And if you open that, you have the option of raising your hand. So let's see if this works. So anybody that was on the call last night, please raise your hand. I just want to see how much, I don't want to be redundant. So far I'm seeing a couple and probably two that haven't gotten to the right spot, but regardless, let me just go over quickly what we tried to do last night and put it in context with what we're trying to do tonight. First of all, the 1848 committee is trying to improve your experiences and be of assistance to all of you in doing what you're trying to do in assisting the chapters with housing. So one of the things we're trying to put on are a number of webinars to give you some insights. And also, as in the case tonight here, is to basically moderate a discussion, to hear your concerns and also to maybe give you some insights and guidance as to how we're seeing things based on the feedback we're getting on the national level. Last night, Rob came in and gave us a big picture, a view of what's going on and sort of how this whole COVID thing is affecting the fraternity. And I think the bottom line of that is the fraternity sort of go-to test case right now is about probably a 25% drop in membership or housing or however you want to look at it. They're looking at some kind of a drop. We don't expect 100% coming back to campuses. Some campuses will be closed, some of the University of California campuses and so on. And so we're looking at what do we do to prepare ourselves for the downside as well as to get ready to open for those that are opening. So Rob gave a good perspective on all of that. And then Steve Bacher, who is our chair of the 1848 committee, gave just an oversight of all the things that we should be thinking about. And as a part of all that, we're breaking out into 3 sessions over the next couple of weeks. We looked at financial scenario discussions as to what do we look, 25%, 50% reduction, what's our break even, should we be looking at lines of credit, do we have a line of credit, should we be drawing down on it, those kinds of things that we'll be discussing tonight. More discussion was on cleaning and on food service, general operations of the fraternity, planned maintenance and repairs and how we're going to approach those things coming into the school year. And also announcing some of the 1848's safer housing initiatives, what should be thought about in terms of just general safety precautions, because we can't lose track of our basic understanding of safety and the priority of safety as we're going through the COVID. That obviously rises to the top, but we have to be careful about other things as well. So as a part of that, tonight is going to be budgeting, planning, and contracting, open discussion. On June 30th, John Ziza, one of our other committee members, is going to be hosting a session relating to cleaning. What are the CDC guidelines? How do we go about taking care of this, unknown situation? Things that we need to look for resources and figure out how to take care of things. And then the third one will be Pete Welsh overseeing or moderating the kitchen operations discussion on July 1st. So tonight what we'd like to do is just kind of touch on what are we going to do for budgeting? How are we going to look at this, regardless of whether or not you're opening your house? And to sort of frame the discussion, what I did is put together just sort of a pro forma budget to see, okay, what should we be thinking about? What are our expenses? What are our revenues potentially? What are variable expenses? What are fixed expenses? And as we go down through the slides, jump in. Use the chat button at the bottom to type in some questions and so on that you might have, or some discussion points that you want us to touch on. We're going to try to figure out whether it's going to work to open up the microphones or not. I've done this in a couple of different situations where it's worked and in some where it really has not, because everybody's talking over each other. So let's get that started. And the first slide, if it will work for me as it did earlier today. There we go. Hopefully you can see this. Let's just start out on the revenue side, assuming that we are able to open up and get some revenue in here. There's rental income. There are other types of income that I've kind of laid out here. Most of this is variable. You can take a spreadsheet like this and use these various categories and try to figure out where your break-even point is based on expenses, which follow below. But to use this spreadsheet, for instance, you could put in number of beds up at the top, and then on the right-hand side, you could try to, using your historical figures, figure out what your rental income is expected to be, has been, whatever, however you're going to look at it going forward here, and put it in on a per bed basis, and put in a formula then on the variable side to automatically calculate those numbers, which allows you then to play around with the number of beds. For instance, if you've got a 30-bed capacity and you only potentially might expect to fill up 20, you can pop that in there and see where you go. You can also, at the end, after you've figured out what your expenses are, you can go back and try to see where your break-even is. So on these expenses, the one that I put in as fixed is your interest income. If you've got any kind of a bank account, hopefully you do, you should have some idea of how much interest should be coming in this year. And that's pretty much fixed. That's not going to be varying based on how many men are living in the house. The rest of these are variable. You know, the late fees hopefully are not very big in collections, but you'll have to play with these depending on what your sources of income are and see where those all play out. Let me just go to the next slide just to get through some of these. And again, if you want to just take a screenshot on these. I have never been on a Zoom presentation that went perfectly, and I don't intend to change that track record tonight, but we'll try to keep it as smooth as possible. Now we started getting into some of the expenses. I think Pete is the same way. When he and I were both kind of in the finance field, when we start looking at a break-even analysis, the first thing probably to do is to see what's your downside, what are your fixed expenses. And on this page, you'll see that most of the expenses on the top are the ones that are fixed. So if you use an outside accounting or tax preparation firm, you're going to be paying that regardless of how many people are living in. The same for insurance for the most part. Collections is variable depending on the number of people that you have in, but the rest of these are all, if you're going to be communicating with the undergrad chapter, if your federal and state taxes are what they are depending on what your status is, licenses, permits, bank fees. This is just a starting point for you all to be thinking about. But these are most of the big category fixed expenses. And if you can think of others that fit in here, please chime in and shoot that on the chat screen. Down below are more variable expenses. Now I've got these fixed set in here as fixed and variable for a reason. You're going to pay some kind of electricity regardless of anybody in the house or not. Same thing for gas. And so a component of this is going to be fixed, and you can pop those in there. And then you can play again with the right two columns, depending on how many people are going to be expected to be living in, because that variable piece, obviously, with all the gadgets the guys are using these days, the electricity and so on are going to be much higher, depending on whether or not you have people living in.
Jim, this is Pete. I just add, as you look at the fixed expenses and in a stressed or very tight cash situation, as many will be in, the one you really don't want to fool around with is payroll taxes. if I see there are personal liabilities beyond just delinquent fees for non-remittal of withheld FICA and payroll taxes. So be very careful with that one. I'm sure your accountant or tax preparer will advise you as well on that.
That is a very good point. So then going beyond that, the repairs and maintenance, you're all too aware, are mostly fixed. Obviously, if you have overflow parties and things like that in the house, those categories are going to go up. But it's pretty hard to tie those to a per person occupancy. These are things that you can look at based on historical. You can try to tighten down things in these various categories. As Pete had mentioned earlier, though, be cautious about deferring too much of the maintenance. First semester is going to be really tough this year, perhaps. Maybe you can push some things into the second semester. But to try to push that off for several years, that all catches up to us and bites us. So these are just some of the categories that you might want to be thinking about. I'm sure you have others that are on your income and expense statements that should be thought about as well. But these are primarily, as I said, these are primarily fixed expenses. You can pop these in early on, and you can, even without putting in any of the variables, you can see how many people you need to live in just to cover the fixed expenses. And that's a good test and exercise to go through just to see where you stand on these things. And then, of course, food service. That's mostly variable, although if you're going to have food service, you're going to have some fixed expenses. Salaries may go up. That's why there's partially variable. You may have to have more servers if you've got 70 men as opposed to 20. So, but if you have one, that's going to be a fixed if you open up at all. Same thing with kitchen operations. You've got some fixed costs there, but the rest are all going to be variable. And again, more of this is going to be touched on with Pete's session on July 1st. But some things to be thinking about: if there are capital repair items that you've been budgeting for and you have reserves for doing it, pop them in here to see, if the stronger house corps are going to want to keep going with any of those kinds of ongoing repair and maintenance items. So that's all I put in here for these for us to discuss. What I'd like to do actually is to try unmuting you all. I can do this, I think, one, but no, you know what? You're going to have to unmute yourselves. So if you want to chime in, you've got a little microphone in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to chime in on this, you can either hit that and chat, or else down at the bottom as well, there's a chat button. And if you've got any questions or comments, you can chime in there. So basically, I'm here to facilitate and moderate, and we will take this as long or as short as you want to. We don't have any, this is not an accounting lesson. I think probably a lot of you are maybe more versed in this than some of the rest of us are. We may have some war stories as to what has worked and what has not worked for you in the past, and also to share, we're all sharing some concerns as to, what we're looking at, what we're cognizant of, what we're most afraid of in terms of going forward here. So if you have anything to add into there, that would be helpful here. Paul just mentioned in here snow removal. Living in Chicago and having gone to school in Minnesota, I can relate. That is a good, that is a, I'd like to think it's fixed, but it's very variable depending on what it is. Does anybody else have any categories that we think we should be looking at? The one that I looked through here and realized that I didn't have, and that's, and it's going to be a big one this year, and that's cleaning and sanitation. And so, we're all talking about that, and we've been back and forth. John, you must be on. I hear your dogs.
Yeah, I'll mute.
But anyway, this could be a pretty sizable expense, and we as a committee are not trying to lay out what you should or shouldn't be doing, other than to say you need to be following CDC guidelines. And we're here to share any information that you may come across as well as to send that down to you. I suggest that you also hit the House Corporation website page on phygam.org. It's under graduate, and then there's a whole section on the House Corp. In there, it's got a lot of good information that we put on there, but I think most helpful are the links that are in there. Some of our preferred providers have put in some very, very helpful links, and this information is changing daily. Our suggestion is that you've got to really stay in touch with your school. First of all, your school, your state, your municipality, they all have a variety of regulations and guidance for what they want to see right now. Hopefully, they also have some helpful links on their websites or in some of their commentary that they're sending out. I hope they're sending it out to you, and if they're not, you need to seek it out, because they're the host institution, and they really need to. You need to follow their guidance in terms of what should or shouldn't be done to properly address all of these items.
And Jim, along the lines of following the school regulations, from a revenue standpoint, I would encourage every house corporation to explore any possible grants, any possible assistance that the school is providing dormitory on-campus residents right now. Clearly, the fraternity houses are residences for students attending the college and should be entitled, in my personal opinion, to assistance as well. A couple of other Fijis and I ended up owning the USC chapter house, and we figured out that there was campus-wide Wi-Fi that was available to the dormitories, and we got together with another fraternity and said, hey, wait a minute, we're providing housing here too. And lo and behold, they popped in a modem or a router, and we saved a whole lot of money on Wi-Fi. So if the school is offering anything right now as far as health, safety, assistance, grants would be wonderful if that were to be the case. You don't want to miss out on that.
It's a good point. And as you're talking about outside assistance possibilities and so on, I popped up a slide here that Pete had contributed for yesterday's session. And Pete, if you have anything to add on this, that's fine. Otherwise, it's kind of just mostly to stimulate some thoughts and for further research on your part. We had this on early, but some joined a little bit later. So I'd suggest if you want to take a screenshot of this and maybe take a look at some of these programs. I think the PPP program is ending here within days, if not tomorrow. And some of these others, so you may or may not qualify for, depending on what your status is. You're a 501c7 or C3 or whatever your program is.
Jake Kramer here, Alpha Fraternity Management. Just wanted to talk briefly about planning for budgets. I don't know if it's been gone over, but really just having funds that you guys are going to put towards any type of COVID-19 health requirements. So here in Oregon and I don't know, California, Washington, we have basically COVID requirements for sleeping porches as well as in-room. So if there's any type of updates that you're going to have to do, so we're going to have to buy new bunks. We're going to have to have them really for capacity 4 to 6 feet apart, but there's going to have to be Mylar between them on those sleeping porches. And then the rooms that previously have been study rooms, we're going to have to convert to sleeping rooms, which when you run through fire code can get pretty pricey. So the vast majority of our facilities with sleeping porches, and there again, with people without sleeping porches, this probably won't be affected because you can have beds 6 feet apart or 2 bunk beds 6 feet apart. But you're probably looking at anywhere from, if you have egress windows already, but if you need fire doors, $1,800 to $2,400 per fire door. And then you're looking at egress and hallways as well. So vast majority of our groups are going to spend about $20,000 to $30,000 this summer just getting their facilities prepped to be able to meet capacity here at Oregon State and at Oregon. So that's just a FYI for anybody. I don't know if they reached out to fire departments, but it seems as though OSHA has somewhat pushed COVID coding into fire coding because, of course, OSHA can't do anything in private residences, but our fire departments can.
Okay, that's very interesting. Is so the compliance then comes through the fire department, or I guess here in LA would be building and safety, but
Correct.
so the House Corps can expect that a upcoming routine fire inspection is also going to have the latest COVID oversight as well, I guess.
And that will completely depend upon your fire marshal. So I work with 3 different fire marshals from 3 different counties. We've got Marion County, Benton County, and Lane County here in Oregon for the different universities that I manage. And all of them have a different attitude towards it. So the vast majority of them, I would say, really just care about the fire code side of things with COVID requirements for sleeping porches and the requirement to have Mylar sheeting if you don't have your bed 6 feet apart. That becomes a fire code issue because of sprinklers. So you can't have them hanging from the ceiling. If you do have them hanging, make sure they're actually on the bunks themselves. Anytime you put something to the ceiling, then you're obviously stopping the water spread from sprinklers from that lateral spray. So that's going to be a major issue, and people I think are going to get dinged because they're going to try to put all this stuff up for COVID safety, and then your fire marshal is going to roll in and tear it all down. So just save ourselves some time and headache by really navigating both those. I have one fire marshal who's told me, I don't care about the COVID stuff at all because that's not my job. And it's a private residence. If you choose to do that, that's up to you. But the changes in the code for 2020, when it comes to fire code, also implement some of this stuff. So he will be enforcing that. So I would contact your local fire marshal based on your county and just have a quick conversation with them as to what can you expect as a fraternity house or a private residence, or if you already know your fire marshal, send them a ring.
That's good. And there's aside from the government oversight, school oversight, there's another constituency that probably shouldn't be ignored, and that's the parents. Parents coming in, and odds are somebody's father or mother's attorney or has some very strong opinions on, safety and compliance and all of that. So just be prepared for, questions, comments, and justification for steps that we as house corporations have taken, and respond accordingly to that.
So during move-in, Alpha Fraternity Management suggests that during move-in that you have a sheet on your front table for any parents for those exact questions, and it should go over cleanliness, which is going to be the number one concern for most parents. How often, and of course I know you guys are going to talk about cleanliness in a different time, but how often are you doing it? How are you doing it? Who's doing it? What type of products are you using? Number 2 is really the fire code stuff. We have these properties, they're inspected twice annually, they're to code. And then we've also met any type of sleeping arrangement issues. And I think that really goes back to individual fraternity houses. And we work with sororities as well. But the big issue here is going to be how many of you offer mattresses on your sleeping porches or bedrooms. And if you currently have mattresses there, you may have a problem because a lot of people are not going to be interested in sharing or using used mattresses based on COVID style not only the sanitation side of things, but just kind of the overall cleanliness aspect that I'm getting from a lot of parents. So basically, we're providing queen size bunk beds if they want to bring an extra long twin or a queen size mattress of their own. That's what we're promoting to all of our students across the board. And I know that seems maybe kind of minuscule, but it's definitely going to be a major issue this fall because it's been a major issue in the past without COVID. So I can only really imagine.
You know, that list of or sign up sheet for questions by occupants or parents or whatnot is a great idea. Another thing that we've done locally at on the USC property is every beginning just before the move-in, we'll do a video walk around of each room, and that's for return of security deposit and verification of condition type stuff. But if there are against other specific things that we've done, for example, moving beds 6 feet apart or hanging plexiglass partitions or whatnot, maybe including those in the video, just for protection. You never know that we're doing proof that we're doing the best that we can from everything we know to be in compliance with health and safety. So it might not hurt to have a record of that.
Correct.
Those are all great points, and I think that one thing that we all need to keep in mind is that, you know, bottom line, we're marketing beds. And to the extent that we're trying to market safety as a part of that, I suggest you really get a jump start on that. And one way to do that is to communicate with the students, with the parents early on, like now, as to what you plan on doing with your house, whether you're doing the 6 feet apart, whether you're doing single occupancy, whatever you're doing, you need to communicate that early. And if you do, I think you'll get feedback. You may find that you're on the right track, and people will say, "Oh, that's great. I'm comfortable sending my son there and living." Or you may get the feedback, "There's no way I'm sending anybody to live in that house unless it's single room occupancy," and so on. So the earlier you know those things, it ties right into this discussion. If you can only do singles and you've got all doubles and triples, say if you've got rooms and not sleeping porches, that's going to have a severe impact on your budget. You're going to have to plug that into whatever spreadsheet you're using for your analysis, and that's going to be very, very important because some of the schools are going to dictate single occupancy for the rooms. And think about what that's going to do for their dorms as well, because most schools are crammed in doubles. Yeah, they may say to themselves that they have to go to singles on all those, and does that create an overflow situation that's maybe even beneficial to us? Who knows? But those are things to think about. And the other thing is, as you're sending out communication and so on, you also, I don't know if you've got any lawyers on your house corps, but we have to avoid lawsuits locally and nationally on all of this. And we have to protect ourselves however we can. So if you communicate early and everybody knows what the expectations are and they know those things before they sign a lease, then I think you're okay. If you spring things on them after they've already signed a lease and now you've got to fight over whether or not they get the money back or they want half off or whatever it is, that's not the best time to bridge those situations. So early.
Jacob, this is Bob Russell, Omega Mu, Orono, Maine 85. I just had a question. Could you elaborate a little bit, if possible, on the bed scenario that you painted? Because I'm assuming that the majority of fraternities have been closed for the last 3 months, and those mattresses have all social distanced. And, I'm just curious of what your thoughts are on why you would need to switch out mattresses or potentially put, plastic covers over them.
Yeah, so, and here again, I'm coming from Oregon, which as of right now is probably the second highest lockdown state in the country, outside of maybe Washington or California. So the whole West Coast is a very different situation than the rest, and I'm just coming from the most extreme view. So when it comes to the mattresses and the partitions or so we've been given options because the vast majority of our student housing, all of our sororities, and I would say about 70% of our fraternities have sleeping porches. So if you're not in a sleeping porch situation, probably doesn't apply because it's not going to be as big of an issue. But on sleeping porches, we've been told that we either have to have our bunks 6 feet apart because the virus doesn't go 6 foot 1 inch. That's just my sarcasm. We have to have the bunk 6 feet apart, or we have to put some sort of, Mylar or shower curtain or whatever in between them. And if we do that, you can literally shove the bunks together as long as they've got that plastic between them. The mattress conversation is more of a parent conversation. I don't think there's any scientific evidence, I guarantee there's not, that there's any health risk for mattresses that are there. But logic and emotion are two different things today. And so you're having individuals come back who may have an issue with that. And that's one of the things that we've just broached over the last several years is instead of spending a lot of housing corporation money replacing mattresses on a 3-year period or a 5-year period, we literally have just gotten rid of mattresses and we require students to bring their own. And we find no one complains about it because everyone would rather have their own mattress anyways. So that's the only reason I brought it up. If it's not an issue in your state or your campus, I wouldn't worry about it at all.
No, I appreciate that feedback. That sleeping porch, Omega Mu has a RAM where all the men sleep in the attic. Is that the same thing as a sleeping porch?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just haven't heard the sleeping porch term. And is it 6 feet? If you've got bunk bed to bunk bed and your feet are next to each other, it's 6 feet from human to human, regardless of toe to toe or anything?
Correct. Yeah, 6 feet. So we're basically, if you've got a long rectangle, we hope that it's wide enough that you can fit 2 bunks, kind of kitty corner across from each other, where you have a 6 foot aisle and then 6 feet in between. And there again, the big thing with that is based on the size capacity of your rooms. And this might be county to county because I believe I'm dealing with 2 different county regulations at 2 different universities. But with bunks, they're okay if you have a triple stack bunk. So the sororities have triple stack bunks. We're pushing them all 6 feet apart, but they're not requiring any type of membrane between the bunks. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. The other question is how long it's actually going to be a quote unquote requirement. No one can really say, well, maybe through one term or maybe through not. So a capacity issue may just be a fall semester. In our situation, we're on quarter system, but it may just be a one term situation. So everybody's campus is going to be different. You're dealing with different college students, different parents, different campus administration, and traditionally different county officials. So I kind of wish you all the best in navigating every single one of those.
Appreciate
In our
that.
case, it's city officials.
Yeah, what I hear coming through in a lot of these discussions we've been having is there are really 2 things. There's the reality of, how are we the safest that we possibly can be, but there's also the perception, and that comes into, how we're going to fill these beds. There has to be the perception that we're taking all the appropriate precautions. It wouldn't hurt to scout around and find out what the competitors are doing. The competitors are, other fraternities and sororities. I'm sure the sororities are probably really on top of this. They usually are. And also, I've been involved in a lot of off-campus, private student housing, and I know those groups have definitely taken a bull by the horns in terms of protocols that they're instituting nationwide with their groups. So I would suggest in your locale, see who some of these private operators are. Jump on their website. They're going to have a section that's going to discuss this and what they're doing in preparation for the fall. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Just, you can imitate some of those things. Lots of resources, but
Jacob, to Jim's point on competitors and sororities, does Alpha Fraternity Management, are you connected with the sorority world, and have they developed guidelines that could be helpful to the fraternity side? That because I agree with Jim, they always are so much more invested in house operations than fraternities seem to be.
Yeah, well, there's three things that the sororities already have integrated for the vast majority that most fraternities do not. You're going to cover those in the next 2 weeks, which is cleaning and food service. And those are going to be two of the major issues that parents come across. Most sororities already have weekly cleaning, if not bi-weekly cleaning, and just swapping in sanitation and saying, hey, you know, we go through and spray down door handles every 3 days, you know, with a disinfectant. You know, it's pretty simple when you already have cleaners on site. So if that's something that's implemented, fine. Do I think that's absolutely overkill? Yes. From a perception standpoint, is that something that we have to do, or is it something that just stands out? Probably. So that's, you know, the cleaning side. The food service side, highly recommend to all of my clients to go with the fraternity food management. And I say that having run food management for the last 8 years, there's a lot of liability with having an on-site chef. There's a lot of liability with having, we were talking about taxing, we're talking about workman's comp. A lot of issues may pop up, and I'm not saying they will, but if you're running through a food management company like College Chefs or Greek Kitchen or whatever it is, you know, totally your choice. Making sure that the contract you have where all of the liability for food service and the management of that food staff meets requirements, OSHA standards, everybody else. Otherwise, you're probably looking at some crazy amount of food management on site with a private chef. And I hate to say that because I think private chefs are an awesome part of fraternity. We had one, and I always enjoyed that. But in today's day and age, that's a difficulty. So those are the two big things sororities already have ahead of everybody. The third thing really comes down to their capacity. For most sororities at Oregon and Oregon State were extremely large. So I'm talking 60 to 70 women on site, where the average fraternity might have 40. So they're just going to lower their capacities. That's just across the board. That's what they're planning on doing, is lowering capacities and increasing the rate of their live out dues to make up for those costs.
On your reference to kitchen operations, I'll put in a plug for my session on July 1st, the kitchen operations. We will have a representative from one of the groups Jacob mentioned. This one's Upper Crust. I think they're a caterer, full soup to nuts, if you will, provider of food service for 4 or 5 Fiji chapters at this point. So if you're interested in kind of hearing that side of the business, join us on July 1st.
And just to follow up on that, we had kind of a preliminary tune-up session a little while ago, and here's just the magnitude of all the things you got to think about. They brought up, their representative brought up the fact that, you know, in some situations for food service, you're going to have either somebody serving, and maybe you can utilize your hard plates and so on if you have the proper dishwashing equipment and so on. But even if you do, there may be regs that don't allow you to do that, and you have to use disposable. If you have to use disposable, depending on your location, it could run from $25 to $100 per person per semester, just for those. So those are all the kinds of things we have to start factoring in. It's only increasing all of our costs. Nothing is going down. So any other questions or comments or categories or what you'd like to discuss on any of this? We're all trying to stay ahead of the curve here. And again, I suggest as you're going through this, definitely hit the phigam.org website, the graduate tab at the top, go down to housing, And there are a lot of links there that will be useful. I know the staff, Theo and the staff and Rob, everybody, all of us are trying to send information in. All of that is very useful to us and to you. And we also ask, as you discover things, please communicate that with the staff so that those links, that information could also be shared with all the rest of us. That's what we're trying to do really with these webinars and these sessions is really, Pete and I we're moderators on these, but you all have a lot of the information out there. We all need to share it. We all need to dig it up and try to use best practices.
And I don't know if John Jesus is still online, but he's going to have a great breakout session on cleaning as well. And we've got some pretty up-to-date information from John on that as well. That's on the third.
Sorry, guys, just to piggyback on any information we would love to give out to all you guys. If you go to our website, Alpha Fraternity Management, and go under webinars, all of the webinars we did in March, April, and May are recorded, so you can just watch them. And those cover navigating finances through COVID, strategy for fraternity housing, and then really just, creating an action plan, which was our most recent one in June. So that information's on there as well. If you guys just, want to bombard yourself with the massive amount of stuff out there.
That's great. We can't be too cautious right now. Well, with that, I don't see any more questions. Anybody else need to chime in on anything? And if not, I suggest you all tune in on June 30th at 7 o'clock Eastern. John Zizek is going to be hosting a really good session. This is probably going to be very heavily attended, I would think, on cleaning. So please come prepared to share some of the information that you've dug up as well. So thank you all for your participation.